For today's session, I'm absolutely delighted to bring you lessons from the Relational Social Work Podcast with Hannah and Matt. Hannah is a team manager at Coventry Family Valued, and Matt is a strategic lead for children in care and care leavers at Coventry City Council. Together they host the Relational Social Work Podcast, which has been shortlisted for several awards, including a Frontline Award for Innovation. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Hannah and Matt for their presentation this morning, and hopefully we'll have time for questions at the end from the audience. If you've got any questions, please post them in the chat.
Hi everyone, so I'm
Hello.
Matt Clayton.
Hi, and I'm Hannah Bedford, and thank you very much for that introduction, Ross. So I'm going to, hopefully the slides get, here we go. So me and Matt always like to start our presentations with pictures of us as children. Somebody once told us that if you show your audience a picture of you as a child at the beginning, then they will like you more. So we've gone with that because we like to get people on board right from the start. So I'm the kid covered in mud on the right, and Matt is the other child on the left. I don't know if you want to say anything about this, Matt.
There we go. Yeah, so we always think it's nice to start with who we are and also just say a little bit about ourselves as children, because I think it's helpful just to frame sort of who we are and sort of a little bit about why we got into the work that we do. So you can see me there as a child. I'm about, I don't know, 2 or 3 years old there. But as a child, I had quite severe dyspraxia. So for the first few years of my life, I couldn't speak or communicate at all. Only really my parents could understand what I was saying. So for reception year 1 and 2 of schooling, I was sort of statemented, and I was in a special school where I had to have a lot of intense help to sort of support me learn to speak before I was able to transition into mainstream schools. And one of the things that's really done for me is realize the importance of support and family. I was really lucky that I had parents that really fought for me to get into that special school. I had a mum that had been a teacher and gave up teaching for a period of time to provide sort of more support for me at home. And sort of my parents had a good support network around them that would allow them to sort of get the additional support that I needed as a child. And as I grew up and started sort of becoming a teenager and starting some voluntary youth work, etc., I realized that actually not every child has those opportunities in the same way. And for a lot of children, especially children that come into the care system, then it's down to us as professionals to be the ones that are fighting for them. And that really sort of started my passion in terms of thinking about, well, how do we make sure that, as Lem Cisse says, for those children in care, the care system's so darn brilliant that any parent would be proud for their child to be in it. So that's just a little bit about me, and I'll let Hannah share a little bit about her journey too.
So I am the daughter of a social worker and a youth worker. So some might say I was destined to become a social worker. But I think, like Matt, I have stories from my own childhood, which really made me realise how important family and wider family are. So when I was younger, my older brother Joel died of leukemia. And at that time, the support that I had, but also my mum and my dad had from their wider support, so whether that be relatives, my grandparents, aunts and uncles, but also from their church community, how they kind of wrapped that love and support around us was really important. And I think has created a lasting impression on me about the importance of family support. And actually for my family, like Matt, I was very lucky that we had all of those people who would come together to support at the most difficult time that I ever had in my life, and I'm sure the most difficult time that my parents ever had in theirs. So it's just always instilled in me the importance of family and family support. And for me, I'm really passionate about keeping families together, and I recognise that with the families that we work with, actually we could all be kind of one step away from being one of those families. We all go through really difficult times, and recognising that family and family networks are incredible and will pull together at those really difficult times. So it's just really kind of instilled that in me as I've kind of moved on to being a social worker.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think I always think about when we share these slides, because the first time Hannah asked, we were doing a presentation to our Family Justice Council conference, and Hannah asked me to send a photo of me as a kid because she thought it would be nice to put photos of us as a kid at the start. So I was like, yeah, fine. We stood up in front of about 150 people, and then Hannah went first, and she hadn't said beforehand we were going to say anything other than show a photo, and then she shared about her brother dying when she was younger, which I didn't know, and sort of stunned the audience, and I had to then react in front of 150 people, and I was feeling quite emotional, and you got quite emotional too, didn't you, Hannah?
Yeah.
So you definitely put me on the spot there.
Yeah, we will like to surprise each other, and anyone who listens to our podcast will see that it's normally Matt who throws in the curveball, but sometimes it's me.
Get your own back that time, won't you?
So we've shared this as our next slide. Cafe Nero, there are other coffee shops available, but Cafe Nero is really important to us because Matt is my manager, and one of the many great things about having Matt as a manager is he likes to have meetings in coffee shops. So he took me to Cafe Nero once, and at that meeting, in fact, I'm going to let Matt tell his version of this story, and then I'm going to tell you all what really happened. So let's let Matt give his version.
Well, yeah. So basically, in my head, I thought it'd be really good to have a social work podcast, and I know there are social work podcasts out there, and actually, there's some really good ones that have really developed over the last year or so. Things like Messy Social Work Matters, things that we've sort of learned to Sky. But I love listening to podcasts, listening to them, especially when I'm running. And I listen to a lot of politics and sports ones. But at the time, there wasn't one that really clicked with me from a social work point of view that was inspiring, uplifting. I'm really proud to be a social worker, and I want to inspire people to be the best social workers they can be and think about innovation, how to do better for children and families. And I really wanted a podcast that was in that vein. So I sort of decided it'd be a great idea to have a podcast, and I was like, I want to host it with someone that would be equally passionate and exciting. So that's I asked Hannah in the coffee shop about this. I think Hannah was a little bit thrown by the idea to start with, weren't you, Hannah?
Yeah, so in my head, what happened was Matt had been my manager for no more than a month at the time, and we went for a coffee, and Matt said, I've had this really great idea about social work podcast, and I thought that is a great idea. And then he was like, and I'd like you to host it with me. And in that moment, I thought, well, Matt's my new manager. I better say yes. I'll be honest, in that moment, I was completely freaked out. However, I am so grateful that we went for that coffee because I now absolutely love it. And I love that I was pushed out of my comfort zone to do that. But it does always make me smile when people kind of ask how this podcast came about. And I think, well, I was asked by my manager and I just said yes. But I'm really glad that we got here.
I think it's worth saying also that it's our 1 year anniversary of the first episode of the podcast today. We just discovered, so it's our first birthday, and we also have to give a shout out to the other member of the Relational Social Work Podcast team, producer Aaron, who's not with us today, but it really wouldn't happen without him because we definitely don't have the ability to edit and make it all come together. So bless him. Sometimes he has a really hard job and go on random rants and just stop in the middle of interviews and stuff. So he always pulls it together. So a big shout out to producer Aaron as well.
Absolutely. So what we decided, obviously we've only got a short amount of time together, and we were asked to come and talk about our lessons from the Relational Social Work podcast, and we have learnt so much. But what we decided, hopefully the audience will remember Top of the Pops, or if you don't, if you're too young to have watched Top of the Pops, it was a chart show, and we're going to give our top 10 rundown of our lessons from the Relational Social Work podcast. And this is from our first 3 series. So we've brought together the kind of top 10 lessons. So without further ado, we are going to go into them.
Awesome. I feel like we needed some music there, Hannah. But
if we had producer Aaron, we would have had music.
I know. So the first lesson is about the impact of poverty and how we need to understand it and stand against it. So we've had a couple of episodes that really featured on this. We had Rachel Wardell, who's the current president of the Associate Director of Children's Services, Sean Williams, who leads a charity in this space as well. But really just that fact that actually we need to really call out in the profession the impact of poverty. You know, we know that you're much more likely to be in care or on a child protection plan if you're from a poor background. The numbers of children in care from places like Blackpool is a key example, but places of deprivation is massively higher than those in rich areas. We know also that Ofsted judgments are much more likely to be negative in poor areas than rich areas. There's something wrong with a system where you're more likely to be in care if you're from a poor background, that you're more likely to be on child protection plans. Actually, poverty is a risk factor, but it's not the fault of parents that we're in those situations. So there's something around the impact of poverty that we really need to advocate against in our profession and really make sure that we're not reinforcing that and we're standing against that.
Absolutely. And one of the things that always stood out for me from our interview with Rachel, who's the president of the ADCS, was we were talking about money within children's services. And one of the things that she said was, absolutely, we need money for services. But if she had the choice, she would always be giving that money to families, recognising that impact that poverty has on them. So that is our lesson number 10. So in at number 9 is authentic relationships support authentic healing, healing. So we've got here pictures of we've got Ian Thomas, Lisa Cherry and Joe Williams, and through all of their kind of episodes and our conversation with them, this really came out. Ian talked a lot about trauma that he'd experienced and trauma that others had experienced, and how that had come from relational trauma, and actually to support relational trauma we needed relational healing. And what he meant by that was actually those relationships, the relationships that we have with the children and families that we work with, they can support that healing journey. And that's always really stuck with me. Ian was one of our really early interviews, and it just really stood out to me as a really important message for social workers. Likewise, Lisa Cherry talked about weaving a web of belonging and the importance of belonging for us as social work staff, also for our children, our families, and how we always need to be thinking about how do we support people to belong. And at the absolute heart of that is the importance of relationships.
Excellent. Yeah, no, completely agree, Hannah. Let's go on to our next lesson. So our next lesson was about the power of storytelling, really, but also at the same time how people are more than just their story. And this was we had some really interesting discussions about this. So we had Professor Richard Rose, who's a real expert on sort of life story work, and have sort of really thought about that. We sort of had Yvette Stanley talking about actually being able to see children's stories. She's from head of Ofsted, so the side of that, and really that thought about how we help children understand their story, how powerful stories are, how actually we relate to one another through stories. But then some really good conversations with Luke Rogers in particular around how stories, we need to make sure that stories aren't the only currency that care experience people have. And often there's this slight obsession with hearing the stories of people, especially sort of on stage people with care experience, and then their value being defined by their story as opposed to their value being about them. So some really interesting discussions around that. So I think we found this quite a complex thing to talk about, and actually because there's that grappling with helping people understand their stories, but helping people realize they're more than their story as well. And we got a little monkey in the city there because we also did an episode where we talked about our own stories from childhood and just reflected on that as well. And I really encourage people listening to actually spend time understanding the stories of those that you work alongside. I think it's really important both in terms of the children, young people, families we're working with, but also those that you're working alongside within your teams. Knowing each other's stories, knowing each other's backgrounds, understanding how each other ticks is really important.
Absolutely, I agree, Matt. Okay, so lesson number 7 is parents are citizens. So we had Professor John Harris and Catherine Baines with us, who had written the book Social Work Parents and the Child Protection Process. And they really talked about some different kind of theories and how parents are viewed in different spaces within that book. But one of the things which really stood out was about viewing parents as citizens, and when we do that, how that actually shifts how we work with families, rather than othering the parents that we're working with, really valuing them as citizens. And we had a really challenging and interesting and thought-provoking episode which we recorded with the Children and Families Truth Commission. So we had Dr. Simon Howarth, who is who is a doctor in social work. We had Natasha Phillips, who is a reporter who reports in relation to social work, and then Michelle Simmons, who is a parent, and they've all been working together to produce this report. And it was really about the experiences of parents who've had their children removed. It was an incredibly challenging episode for us to record, because it really made us reflect on actually how can the system feel for the families that we're working with. And that was really difficult to hear some of those experiences that had been, I can't remember the number of parents who'd been spoken into for this, and children, but it was incredibly powerful to hear actually how they had experienced the system, and it was really a kind of a call to action for us to really think about our practice and how humane our practice is.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things we just need to be really open to in the profession. I think sometimes it's hard to hear those voices, because I think we all like to think that we practice in an anti-oppressive way, but actually I think we forget about the power that we have as social workers and how that feels when we're involving ourselves in families' lives. You know, there's a lot of fear of social workers. Ultimately, sort of we're seen as having the power to remove children from their families, which is one of the most draconian powers of the state. And we have to think about the reality of what that looks like in a family's life and the fear and anxiety that causes, and reflect on that as well.
Absolutely.
So we'll move on to lesson number 6. Participation needs to be sophisticated. We've had some of our most brilliant episodes when we've involved sort of young people within the pod as well. So we had the privilege of being with Young Persons Benchmarking Forum, and which is up of care leavers from across the country. So we had Harley, Dylan, Mark and Victoria there. We also have been with the National House Project, so Sue Hammersley, who was director, and Chloe there. And we had a really good episode with Des Holmes where we talked about this as well. And really that complexity around participation, actually, how it's so important that people are involved, that those that are use services are involved in them, but how that needs to not be tokenistic, how we really need to think about what that looks like, how we can and can't involve people in services. And I'd really encourage people to listen. Des gave some really good lessons in terms of what that looks like in particular, and sort of some of the complexities around how we value lived experience, what that actually means, the fact that everyone has a level of lived experience. So what are we talking about when we mean lived experience? Some really good things to think about in that. And so I really encourage people to think about that, listen to that. But I think when we do it well, it can really shape our practice in a really good way, and really shape our services in a really good way to make sure we're delivering the best service we can be. But we just have to make sure we're doing that in the right way.
Absolutely. Okay, so lesson number 5 is around amplifying and listening to marginalised voices. We've got loads of episodes up here, but we had an episode with the Family Justice Council. So we had Sir Andrew McFarlane and Jenny Beck, Shukati Sen, who is the Director of Children and Education Services in Coventry. We've got Hannah McCowan, who work, I always get it wrong, it's the National Leaving Care Benchmarking Forum. And we've got Catherine Gladwell, who worked for Refugee Education UK, Councillor Pat Seaman there, who is a Coventry councillor, and Ryan O'Donnell. I'm going to focus, I guess all of these brought out different parts and thinking about marginalised voices in different ways. The thing that was really kind of a key message that kind of ran throughout all of these is we absolutely need to be listening to these voices, to voices of families, to voices of people who are care experienced, to voices of the community. Ryan's episode really stood out for me. So Ryan was a foster carer and from America, and the child who was in his care, they thought they were going to be adopting him and his wife, and they'd been told that he didn't have a family. But what they then found out was that there was a dad, and actually Ryan and his wife, how they advocated for this dad who had been kind of excluded, and actually they were able to work with him and really support him, and actually that led to this little boy being able to return to his family. Really powerful, and actually how quite a sliding door moment. Actually, I know me and Matt reflected that if this child had been fostered by somebody else, could his outcomes have been really different. So yeah, lots of kind of key messages that came through in all of those episodes about making sure that we really listen to these marginalised voices, and that we use our power as social work to make sure that we're amplifying their voices.
Fab. The next lesson we've picked out is about how everybody needs a tribe, and we've got a range of people that spoke to us about that. Sort of Josh McAllister, Isabel Trowler, Pamela Edward. Really, that importance of having that tribe around you, that support, what that looks like. I think one of the things that a couple of people in here, Josh and Pam, really drew out was lifelong links as an example of a sort of innovation service. It really does that. It was picked up in the care review about each young person having at least 2 loving relationships where they leave care. And we know despite often the care system often breaks relationships instead of builds and maintains them, and lifelong links is something that can sort of does the opposite. It really works to build those relationships for young people as they're in care and preparing to leave care. And the importance of that, we know for each of us actually relationships are one of the most important things in our lives, but we often sort of seem to forget that in terms of sort of children, young people we're working with, and often just accept that they move around the system without really thinking, well, how do we maintain those relationships? How, when something ends, whether it's a home that someone's staying in, a school place, do we make sure that the people that matter to them are still able to be in their lives going forward? So the importance of that, whether that's through lifelong links like that, or whether that's through something like sort of the work that Beth does with Care to Dance in terms of building new community for children and young people, bringing people together to build that community and build those relationships and find your community and tribe in that way. So we've had some really good debates on the pod around what that looks like for different people.
So lesson number 3 is the importance of hope. So up here we've got Beverly Barnett Jones from the Nuffield Family Justice Foundation. We've got Anna Glinsky, who I know has done one of these Frontline Talks in the past, from the Child Sexual Abuse Centre of Expertise. Always Hope. So we had Jessie Ben-Ami and Francis Flaxton, and then we've got our very own Matt there at our reunification conference, where we had an episode which had the talk that he'd done at that conference. I think this lesson has kind of threaded through so many of our episodes, and has really stood out in terms of actually the importance that our practice is hopeful, and the importance that we're able to support families at times when people can feel really hopeless, to have that hope, to be able to look forward and think about what that change will look like. I know that in terms of Anna's episode that she did with us, it was something that we really reflected on afterwards, obviously thinking about sexual abuse, and Anna said to us, actually this is really hopeful work. And I think that was a real kind of challenge to us and to some of our listeners as well, to think of actually when we're thinking of child sexual abuse, thinking about hope and thinking about for children who've experienced sexual abuse, how they can be supported to recover, and actually the hope within that. And I think that was a really kind of powerful message that came through. Thinking in terms of our reunification work, when we spoke about that on the pod, actually the importance of that hope that change can happen, and actually we can be reunifying families, and we should be reunifying families, and how much hope that can bring to family.
Fab, yeah, thanks Hannah. We'll come to lesson number 2. Quite excited because we didn't practice the timing, and we wanted to finish at 25 past, and we are almost exactly on target, which is amazing.
Which is amazing for us.
So this one is to love is to act, and I think this was a really key message as well, that actually the work we do is about loving children and families, and love is a really important value. I think for a long time love was almost like a taboo word in children's social work, but it's really important that actually love is at the centre of our system. But that love then leads to actions, and so we've sort of talked about what that looks like in different things, whether that's sort of the work that Lem Cisse that talks about in terms of what the care seems to be like, but then some really innovative things like sort of Dave and that for Mad Lug that sort of created that luggage that makes a difference, that really is about them. Every bag sold gives bags to children in care, so they don't have to move with bin bags. Really thinking about what that looks like in practice. And so we've had some really good conversations around that. Again, sort of Laurie Kilby, that I know has been involved with Frontline, some of the work that she's done around weekenders and thinking differently around foster caring and building relationships that way. So that actually the work we do should really lead to action, and that's a key part of building love. I think we've had some really interesting debates around love in Coventry. We've got this thing called Child Friendly Cov, where we've got a number of pledges for young people, and one of the pledges is about children and young people feeling loved. And it was a really interesting debate, because when we were like, should we have a pledge around this, there was a lot of think, oh, is that appropriate for you? Almost like it was a taboo thing for young people to feel loved, because that might have bad connotations. But actually when we surveyed children and young people, they were all really clear that was one of the most important things to them, that they felt loved. And so I just think that's fascinating, that's what came from children and young people. But sometimes in the profession we've almost been like nervous to say that.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And it leads us really nicely onto our top lesson, which is to love and care for each other. So in this picture we've got producer Aaron as well, who's not with us today, but I think for this podcast to work, it's because we have got so much love and care for each other. I think my favourite bit of feedback that we've ever had from a listener was somebody saying that listening to our podcast is like a warm cup of tea and listening to two friends chat about social work. And we're really glad that kind of comes out and comes across in our episodes, because the work that we all do, it's really tough, but actually having that love and care for each other is so important in what we do. And I think we talk about the importance of showing love for the children and families that we work with. And I think in order to do that, we absolutely need to love and care for one another. So we're coming to the end right on time. I'm incredibly impressed, because without producer Aaron tapping his watch at us, me and Matt normally kind of go off on all sorts of tangents. But we've got our different social media handles there for people if they'd like to connect with us. There's also a QR code there that you can scan, and that would take you straight to our website. And on the website, you can sign up to our newsletter. And we every now and again we have random draws of people who've signed up to the newsletter to win a Mad Lug bag. And our podcast is available on all major podcast platforms, and we have new episodes that come out every Monday. So thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing the screen because I can't see anything other than the slides. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Just take this opportunity. Thank you both so much for sharing your reflections on your kind of journey through the podcast. I think it was really interesting to get those kind of, the countdown worked really well and was really effective, so thank you so much. Just invite people, there's a couple of, you can see the chat there, just thanking you for your time and and the experiences that you shared. I did have a question which I would pose to you in a podcast style. If you had any kind of dream guests moving forward, so you've kind of given us the last year, but thinking about moving forward and maybe what you might have planned, what might be kind of topics or dream guests that you've got, that your hopes for the future moving forward?
Me and Matt have both smiled because we both know exactly who each other are going to say.
Well, we've always had, it's a bit of a cheeky one, but we're both massive Liverpool fans. So our real dream has always been to get Jurgen Klopp as an interview on the podcast. So that's our little one, which we always answer. I think we've been really lucky, though, in seriousness. When we came up with it, we had people like Des, Josh McAllister, people that we really wanted to get on, and they've all been really happy to come on. So we've got lots of amazing people lined up going forward. But we're and it's great because lots of people contact us to go on. But so really we just like to get a mix of voices. We like to get people from across the spectrum, so people sort of working in child protection through to care leavers, people with different specialisms, and people that are just got interesting things to say, that are doing innovative work in the space, whether that's innovative work on the front line, whether that's innovative work in the charity sector, just things that make you think and hopefully inspire people that social work can really make a difference to people's lives.
Thank you. And what about yourself, Hannah? Is it similar, or have you got other hopes?
No, absolutely. Really similar. It's funny because we say Jurgen Klopp tongue in cheek, but actually, in all seriousness, he is a really relational and restorative leader. So I think that there's a lot he could teach us as well in social work. But there's some people in terms of social work academics that I really admire, and there's people that we have got lined up coming on in the future, such as Professor Harry Ferguson, people like that I'm really looking forward to, and I think that kind of mix of professional and lived experience as well, I think always brings a real kind of richness to the conversation.
Brilliant. And obviously at the start, Hannah, you kind of shared your kind of journey into this. How would you both reflect on kind of your experiences of being kind of podcast hosts? How has it challenged you in any way, or what have you learned about yourselves from doing this?
Well, I think one of the things we learned early on is we both say actually a lot. So it's really funny when we listen back to our early episodes and our episodes now. I think we have got better at what we're doing. But I think for me, and I know when I've spoken to Matt about this, I feel so privileged to be doing this. Some of the people that we get to speak to is incredible, and it's so wonderful when you have people, although I felt completely out of my comfort zone, now having people, I was in a meeting with somebody the other day that I'd never met from another local authority, who said it was like you were on the plane with me the other day because I was listening to you in my headphones. And that can always feel a bit bizarre. It's like, oh my goodness, kind of, because sometimes when we're recording the episode, it feels like we're having a chat and then it's going out there. But I feel really, really privileged and really lucky to kind of be in this space and to be able to kind of put those things out there, and to hopefully be influencing practice.
And Matt, obviously it was your kind of idea initially. Has it kind of lived up to what you hoped it would be?
Yeah, I think it's exceeded it, to be honest. I think I love doing it, and it's probably one of my favorite bits of each week is sort of ultimately sort of me, Hannah and Aaron have a lot of fun, but also we get to meet inspiring people, and just especially when they come in person, we get to sit and have a coffee and chat and just sort of think about sort of social work, the difference it's making. And we've met some amazing people. We've managed to do some live events. It's really inspiring. And some of the times, like this week we did one with Social Matters, all about sort of race and things that we've recorded, which probably again comes out in a couple of weeks, which is one of my favourite ones we've done. But just the energy in the room, the fun, laughter, then getting into serious things. Actually, it feels a really privilege to get to do it and have those conversations, and just to speak about practice in a like really inspiring way each week kind of reminds you why you're in the work that you are. And so yeah, it feels a really privileged to do.